Can you all hear me? I'm a little bit soft-spoken, so speak up if you can't hear me somewhere. I tend to get softer and softer further I get into the talk. I'm going to talk about ASHRAE thermal guidelines. They have just revised the guidelines, and also talk a little bit about how that connects with this new data center that is planned for, that ADC has planned. I will really quickly go through this. It's going to take just 15 minutes. It's a very short time. It might be a little bit fast, but that's what we have to live with. Talk about the revised ASHRAE thermal guidelines. I need to define what recommended and allowable ranges are. Otherwise, it's very difficult to understand what I'm talking about. These guidelines are about temperature and humidity specifications for data centers. The implications for energy efficiency. How do we show compliance with these new requirements in ASHRAE by using a new metric? And then say something about ADC's thermal performance. I'm not going to go into energy performance because Ramsey will take care of that, of course, but I will mention some other benefits, the thermal benefits with this design. This is how these thermal guidelines look like. How many of you know about this guideline? Okay, so a minority it looks like. This guideline was written by ASHRAE Technical Committee 9.9. That is really the committee about data centers, how to cool data centers at ASHRAE. It's ASHRAE's largest committee. I think they have 200 or 300 members now. This particular guideline, though, was really written by equipment or server vendors. So it's a vendor-centric document. It was not really written by consensus of TC 9.9. And that might give, that is a reason probably for the really conservative ranges for temperature and humidity that you find in this document, even after they revised them. Okay, let's talk about the recommended range and the allowable range, and sorry about that. We also need to define what an over temperature is and an under temperature. All right, recommended range, that is really how you would like to operate your facility. This is the recommended range. It's quite tight. The allowable range is more a statement of functionality. If you operate outside that particular range, this range, you're operating up here, you might actually have a failure of your server equipment. And why do we have this recommended range that is much tighter than the allowable? Because this range takes into consideration reliability of the equipment and other factors. So this is almost like a stoplight. You have red up here, you have orange here, you have green in here. It's just good to have a buffer there, so you know that when you start to approach that buffer, go through that buffer, you are really at that, you need to stop, right? You came to that red light. And the recommended and allowable range, they're valid both for humidity and temperature. I will talk mainly about temperature here, but there is also limits for humidity. So keep this in mind when we get into later in this presentation. Over temperature is when you're above the recommended max, and under temperature when you're below minimum recommended. I look at her now because something happened here again. That's so good. We had a little problem with this computer before, so. Interest of how to optimize data centers, a really good place to start is ASHRAE TC 9.9. They have now published, I don't know how many documents, but probably 8 or 10 now It's a really great resource. Oh, you got going here? Okay, great. And this was the next slide. All right, so we can step forward. I'll just take this, I can point. All right, this is comparison between the 2004, that was the first issue of version, and this is the last, 2008 to 2009. And again, we have this low end temperature, high end temperature. This is recommended range again. We have low end moisture, high end moisture, and how to show compliance with the thermal limits. And as you can see here, in 2004, the recommended range was between 20C and 25C, or 68 to 77. That was a very narrow range, and if you want to save or conserve energy in data centers, that was a real limitation. So in 2009 here, that was opened up a little bit from 18C to 27, or 65 to 80. And that happened to be the same range as telecom has been operating in for many, many years. This is still considered to be quite conservative if you compare with the specifications from equipment manufacturers. We're going to look at that later. And the moisture range was also opened up from the years before to the 55% relative humidity. Now it's more critical, and the next slide I'm going to show that a little bit in an easier way, so I'm not going to touch on that right now. And the last thing here, show compliance. There were no guideline in the 2004 version. In the 2009, there is a guideline of using this RCI, the Rack Cooling Index metric, to demonstrate that yes, we are operating within this new range. Next slide.
Is this the recommended range, or is this the maximum?
This is the recommended range for operating a facility. Thank you. All right, this is a psychrometric chart. I don't know, do most people understand how to read a chart like this? It's really a question of temperature down here and absolute moisture on this axis. This box here, that smallest box, that was the recommended range in 2004. And the red box is the new recommended range. And as you can see, it has expanded out here, and it's a bigger area now. Still very limited. Telecom is this box, goes like this. They don't have a lower recommended humidity. Basically, they don't have an active humidification telecom central offices. But anyway, so you see, if we move from this little box here to this little larger box, that's a new class 1 and 2. A class is just that a conventional data center is a class 1. That's the only thing to remember here. You have 4 classes. All right, next slide, please. Now the question is, why do we have this little box here when the typical server specification is about that area? Substantially larger. We are missing out on a lot of opportunities here, especially when we want to deploy airside economizers. The good thing is that in the Bay Area, this new recommended range is pretty adequate. You can save a lot of energy, maybe even turn off your chiller system most of the year. But it would be, ASHRAE is looking into this now. Why is there such a misfit here between the equipment manufacturer specifications and our recommended range? Next, please. We have a real challenge with this laptop. I can add that to that this range here for equipment manufacturer's spec. They're saying that you should be able to operate in that range. So it's not that this is some kind of allowable range, but that's a recommended range. All right.